Good morning. Anybody who wasn't here last week, Jesse's going to, when she gets back, she's going to give you a handout, but I'm also asking that, trying to figure out how much I need to recap. I could give you a quiz. How about an oral quiz for those who were here last week? Well, okay, I'll start with the easy stuff. Sorry. I'm Judy Skeen, teach at Belmont, religion, variety of things. Was here last week. So if you weren't, you're not left out, but you're welcome to ask questions if something doesn't add up. Anybody remember what these are for? Symbols of chronos, kairos. Good. 2 words for time. This is the kind of time we measure in 24-hour segments. Long before time was measured in that way, people were observing the changing of time through the day based on the light in the sky. And not just monastics that we're talking about, but farmers and folks who lived by that, as well as folks who at that point had no electricity. So when the sun went down, life changed because of what was possible. Kairos, there's a electronic candle in here, so that's how weak of a symbol it is. But kairos is another Greek word for time, and it means eternal time. And part of what was helpful for me to learn was that eternity doesn't start when I die, when I leave here. We're already in eternal time in the sense that we live in the presence of God. I don't know what part of what we know and do and are here goes with us, but I know that what's happening here and what happens wherever we're going is deeply connected spiritually. So I think I said this last week, and yesterday I know I said 2 things last week that were priority, and I remember the first one. I don't remember the second one, so y'all can help me with that. But the first one is this intersection of chronos and kairos is where we live as spiritual beings. There certainly are people who live in a world with no awareness of kairos, right? And there are some of us. My confession last week was about living much of my adult life as a workaholic until I came to some of what I'm sharing with you all these 2 weeks. There's some of us for whom chronos becomes not just a measure of time, but a kind of taskmaster, a kind of relentless pushing to do more. So what we're talking about last week and today is thinking about the way we live our days as this intersection of eternal time and chronos time, and how I think most of us were probably taught some version of having a quiet time. That's what it was called when I was growing up, where you took some time in the morning or some time in the evening and you read your Bible and you maybe wrote in a journal and you prayed. I got no problem with that. Well, I had a problem doing it. I had a problem with the discipline of it, but I got no problem with the idea of it. But when I hear my students talk about it these days, sometimes it sounds like it's their inoculation to do that in the morning and then live the rest of their day. And again, not a bad thing. I sometimes challenge them on when they say, when I do that, my day goes better. When I don't do that, my day doesn't go so well. I challenge them on whether or not that's kind of magical thinking. That by showing up to God or showing up to ourselves quietly at some point in the morning, we somehow change the way the day goes. I absolutely believe it probably changes the way we are in the day, but I'm not sure in a world that moves as fast and as loud as ours does, that it's enough. So what you're hearing me suggesting to you is a way of pausing during the day, briefly pausing, not on your knees with your eyes closed for 20 minutes. Most of us couldn't do that even if we wanted to. So the model we started talking about last week, and we're going to finish up here in the next few minutes, and then think about how that might apply to those of us who are not monastics. The model we talked about is something that Saint Benedict, if not sooner, established a kind of rhythm for the day in monastic communities that had 8 eras of the day. Now, we're going to call them hours, but please don't confuse that with this. It's more 8 seasons of the day. And in a monastic community, as I said last week, in most of the monastic communities I'm familiar with these days, the bell rings 8 times. 4 of those times, you stop what you're doing and go to the chapel. And there's a 30 to 45-minute service of chanting and singing and prayers and reading of scripture. The other 4 times, you stay right where you are. If you're in the kitchen chopping food for lunch, if you're in the field working, if you're in the library studying, you stay right where you are, knowing that everybody everywhere at the monastery is stopping to pray at that time. So that might be a little more of a model of what would make sense for us. So let me read you a poem. It's the poem I started with last week, and we'll have just a moment of silence, and then we'll quickly work back through the ones we covered last week. I'm just going to name them again. Not yet. Oh, hang on, just a minute. Yeah, she's going to give you a handout which has these 8 hours of the day. But here's a poem from Robert McQuiston, who is a Memphis attorney who wrote a little book called Always We Begin Again. He took St. Benedict's rule and rewrote it for people like us who aren't living in the monastery, but who are wanting each day we have, whether it's a work day or a non-work day, wanting each day we have to be in the company of God. So here's a poem from that book. At the beginning of each day, after we open our eyes to receive the light of that day, as we listen to the voices and sounds that surround us, we must resolve to treat each hour as the rarest of gifts and be grateful for the consciousness that allows us to experience it, recalling in gratefulness that our awareness is a present we know not where or how or why. When we arise from sleep, let us rise for the joy of the true work that we will be about that day, and considerately cheer one another on. Life will always provide matters for concern. Each day, however, brings with it a reason for joy. Every day carries the potential to bring the experience of heaven. Have the courage to expect good from it. Be gentle with this life and use the light of life to live fully in your time. So will you join me in just a moment of silence and invite your whole self to show up here? Amen. So at the beginning last week, I asked you all to think about what your days are like. Are there times in the process of most of your days that you actually feel things are flowing? A time of day that for you is a time of energy or grace, a time when you feel glad to be alive and things are pulling together? And then is there a time of friction? A time that even when things are going well, some part of you is kind of fighting it. Or I confessed last week that I'm not a morning person. So sometimes mornings have friction in them for me until I get myself up and moving, which I do on a regular basis. But for me, there is a pattern of morning friction and transitioning from one thing to another friction. So I'm not so much asking you to think about what part about your work you hate, although that might be a clue. If you find yourself at 4 o'clock every day thinking, oh, I've got to find another job, or this isn't working out, I thought retirement would be different than this. Whatever your life rhythms are, if you will, think of a pretty regular time during the day where you experience friction and a time where you experience flow. Because when we get to the end of looking at these 8 hours or seasons of the day, we're going to see if this practice might help us in both of those times, perhaps in some additional ones. In one of the books that I use for spiritual formation class at Belmont, the author says that Thomas Merton said this quote: "Pray as if everything is up to God, and work as if everything is up to you." I looked it up this week. It's also attributed to Augustine and Irenaeus. I don't know which one of them said it, and one of them could have said it and Thomas Merton repeated it. I'm here to say I disagree with all three of them. And here's why. And I will say I disagree with Augustine on a number of things, but his view of women was pretty brutal. I agree with the premise that for me, one of the lifelong questions that I know I'm not going to get an answer to, but that I live with, is what is God's to do and what is mine to do? For me, that's a very live question almost every day. And it has to do with, am I expecting some authority beyond me to come in and make the world as it's intended to be? Or do I believe that one of the things we were given was a creative initiative, order, and invitation to participate in making things the way they're supposed to be? And if I listened to Merton, Irenaeus, Augustine on that one particular point, it would have fed my workaholism completely. So I want to give you an alternative to a way of thinking about that. Parker Palmer calls it it'll come to me. So Parker Palmer talks about when we say we believe in God and we pray to God, but we behave as if everything is up to us, it is called, it was right there. Well, it's certainly living in the tragic gap, but it's not. It's a kind of, thank you, Janet. It's a description of a person. Hang on. Functional atheist. We're functioning like atheists if we say God is holding the world, but I have to fix everything. I'm behaving as if I don't believe that God is participating in mending the world. Okay? I'm glad I came up with that. I was worried about my brain at that point. So last week we talked about seasons of the year and how every season has an invitation. The ones you like and the ones you don't like still have an invitation for you. And then we moved into the hours of the day. So if you did not get a handout last week, or if you don't know where it is and you want another one, we got at least 25 or so there that Jessie will share with you. And while she's doing that, I will say, if you're wondering, what is this talk about? I hope it's more than a talk. I hope you'll talk back, and we're going to have some time for questions and answers, but you can interrupt me at any point. This is about living a fulfilled, satisfying life, but it's not just about us being happy. It's about living life with God. So back to that eternity piece. I don't know how you were raised or how you were invited to think about it, but I thought there was a task here and now in this life, and then everything would change after this life. And I think a whole lot will change. And again, I don't know. But I'm part of my faith is trusting in the force of love that moves the world. I think there needs to be another word like functional atheist for those of us who thought this life is just going to be a slog. It's not ever going to get better. We're just here to be miserable for however long we get to live, and then we get to go to heaven. That's kind of a raw deal. And if you look around the world and see the delight that surrounds us, think about what got created. Think about the ways our bodies work. Think about what's possible for us to feel toward each other. That's not just something to be survived or gotten through. It's a world and a life full of delight. So it feels dishonest to me, dishonoring to the one who created us, to live this life as if we're just here to survive. So this talk is about living into the seasons of each day in the company of God with deep spiritual satisfaction and a sense of how our calling, who we are in the world and what we are supposed to help mend, is connected to who we deeply are as human beings. Okay, 8 seasons of the day. I'm going to go really quickly through the first ones that we covered last week and just say a few words about them. And when we get done with these 8, I want to talk to you not about how we ought to all live like people in a monastery, but how this practice might help us in the lives that we're living now. Vigils, night watch, darkness. It can be a time of fear. It can be a time of rest. It is often a time that takes courage to give ourselves to it. If you have a hard time going to sleep at night, if your mind's anxiety ratchets up at night, you might want to pay attention to this vigils and night watch rhythm. Lauds. Lauds is that first awareness of light coming, early morning. And again, I remember I said last week, you don't have to be up before sunrise to experience Lauds. Lauds is my first visual awareness that the light has returned. So it could be when you wake up much later. But it might be at 5 in the morning when you get up to go to the bathroom and you realize that outside the window where it's still dark, it's not as dark as it was at 10 o'clock or midnight, that the light is coming. So Lauds is that first recognition. If we were in monastic life, we'd be getting up at 4:30 to be at 5 o'clock at the chapel. We don't have to do that. You can if you want to, but we don't have to do that. And you've got on your handout there that there's an invitation response with each day. I'm not going to go through all of those, but if you want to ask about those, we can. The next is prime. And prime is that deliberate beginning. The difference between the energy in your body when you first wake up and realize daylight's here or coming, and then when you are up and moving and getting started. And the invitation of prime is to pause. Actually, the invitation on all of these is just to pause and recognize the movement of the day, but to stop and look around you and then move, which can happen really quickly. Again, this is not saying 8 times a day we take 20 minutes to do a prayer. You can, but most of us wouldn't find that a realistic way to practice. Okay, terse. Mid-morning, I confess I'd never thought about noticing mid-morning. I'm up, I'm working, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But now that I'm aware of terse, I'm more aware that that friction that I feel first thing in the morning, by the time I get to 9 or 10, and I'm up doing the work that I've chosen to do, that I feel called to do, I got energy in me, I've got enthusiasm. And so my response in that moment is one of gratitude and recognizing the enthusiasm as a gift from God for what is moving through me and what I have to offer in the world. And remembering that just 2 or 3 hours ago, I was thinking, here we go again. And that passed. Just like winter will pass, just like summer will pass. These seasons of the day help us remember that what I'm feeling in this moment isn't going to last. Maybe not even more than an hour or 2. Okay, so terse. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Sext is not sex, It's got a T on the end, and it's the Latin word for peak or noonday or middle of the sky. And this one is sometimes puzzling to me, except for when it's summertime. And summertime at noon, I'm usually grumbling about how hot it is. So it's a reminder that of this, the paradox of midday is we've probably gotten a morning's worth of work done. And if we pause, we can actually feel some satisfaction about that. Maybe some of the things you were struggling with at 8 a.m., you've already taken care of. So you can pause, you can give thanks. As I said last week, most of the world has a good meal and then takes a nap. We might want to think about that. But it's that recognition that our energy will not last steadily through the day. We need some nourishment. And we don't just need physical nourishment, we need spiritual nourishment. We need reminders to help us stay focused as we started the day on what it will look like for the day to have closed with us having done fulfilling work. Known. Okay, that's where we stopped last week, was midday. So known is the first notice that the shadows are lengthening. Sometimes in the year, that would be 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? But it's, so for me, it was, I took off my watch 30 years ago and started paying attention to where the light was in the sky. And sometimes that was really challenging inside an office building. I would blast through the day and it would be dark before I realized it because I hadn't looked out the window, I hadn't paid attention. My confession that's coming about Vespers, about evening and closing of the day and my frustration with that, noon became a time when I could pause before that evening pause and say, okay, another day is going. It's not gone, but it's going. How can I release my sense of responsibility and my sense of frustration that I didn't get as much done as I thought I would? I was one of those people who my to-do list went on forever. And I started every morning thinking, all right, I can do this. And every afternoon about 4 or 5, I'd think, yep, failed again. And so, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but known became an invitation to welcome the closing of another day, to welcome the limitation that my body will not go forever, it needs rest. Kind of just like that noonday, whatever kind of rest or pause you need. This is preparation for the full night's pause. All right, so known, shadows lengthen, early decline. Sometimes it brings disappointment. It always brings a recognition of our limitations. Sometimes it brings the need for forgiveness, forgiveness of ourselves, forgiveness of someone else. The ability to move into nighttime without carrying a grudge. And again, not just a grudge against somebody else, but a grudge against yourself for failing yet again to finish your to-do list. Most of the mystics that I've read talk about having your death ever before you. And I can't remember what I said last week about this. If I did, when I was younger, it made no sense to me. It just seemed morbid. The more I've been in the company of people dying and decided that one of the ways to honor them is to carry that with me in some way, the more I've realized that recognizing that that will come for me and you can help me live each day more fully. It also helps me get over myself, right? When I think that I'm supposed to be producing more, working more. I'm not anti-work. I'm anti-workaholism. Okay, so known, if we were thinking about a lifetime, these 8 hours, 8 seasons as a lifetime, known is late middle age. Known is recognizing that aging is coming relentlessly. And however much we fight it, it will still come. So known is forgiveness, recognizing limits. And it's offering up the work of our hands of that day, the work of our hands in any given season, offering it up for God to multiply it, letting go of my need to make sure it's big enough, and letting God do the multiplying of whatever I've brought. Okay. Yes, sir. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that points to, I don't think I romanticize an agricultural life, but I do grieve what we've lost because of our distance from an agricultural life. Being a farmer 50 years ago, 100 years ago, right now, no piece of cake, a lot of hard work. But the rhythms of nature taught them how to let go, how to be, uh, how to say, another day's coming. I will work incrementally on this. Tomorrow will be a day to finish that task. Um, I moved from the Belmont neighborhood out to Franklin in 2012, and I moved because I rescued some horses and was having a place for them, had a barn built, and but another layer of my recovering workaholism showed up out there because I was trying to finish every job. And it took me a couple of months to realize it will never all be finished. There will never be a day when every fence board on the place is perfectly in place and there are no broken ones. And I've now lived into that where I've spent 2 days fixing fence boards and the next day one's busted. And that's one example of how it's helped me be more incremental and realize I need to keep doing the work, but my notion of completion or perfection or finished is too rigid for human experience. And I think that's part of the agricultural idea, part of living into the seasons. Even if we're not making our living into the seasons, we're still living in the rhythms of the natural world that we exist in. And there are gifts in that, and not just weather to grumble about. There are ways to let that hold our lives, that bring spiritual, emotional, psychological, physical rest and comfort. I have here, it is only within limits that anything meaningful can happen. If everything is possible all the time, no boundaries, no definitions, we'd be lost. The rhythms and structure that we have help us know what's possible and what's not possible. The lesson of the lengthening shadows, known, the first notion that the sun is going down, is to forgive and to live to the full within the inherent limit and boundaries of our lives. I'll come back to what my, I'm going to say sin was that made me push against that so much. But Vespers, you probably heard of Vespers. There are Vespers services that happen around dusk. Vespers, in the language of the seasons of the day, it's when you have to turn on the lamps. So it's darker than it was at 3 or 4. Light, extra light is needed to actually see. And Vespers, in most cases, is the time when work is put away. For good or for bad, we now have 24-hour access to everything that we need to do our work, right? And I think there is for good or for bad, but it comes down to that spiritual discipline we talked about last week, to be able to figure out where I need to limit my own access or my own push to keep working. So remember, Lauds was that first glimpse of light. Vespers is the counterpart, this disappearing of the light, the first true awareness that darkness is returning. You put your tools away, you take your apron off, change your work clothes, you wash up, and put on your evening robes if you're a monk. Vespers invites peace of heart. which is the reconciling of the contradictions within us and around us. So because the monks get up at 4:30 and do lauds and then have breakfast and then do the next one, which is prime, they're eating before Vespers. So they eat, they have a Vespers service, they change into their evening robes, and what's left is Compline, which is relinquishing ourselves into the night, which takes us full circle to where we started that night watch. Compline is completing the circle. It's closing the day. It's confessing, and it's leaning into faith, the faith that helps us lean into a dark night. It reinforces that the rhythms of our day are the rhythms of our lives. Birth, daylight, death, darkness. It helps us face fear and the darkness that's out there and the darkness that's in here. It helps us remember that there's a way to live into that by faith. Your habits in the evening and what you do before it's time to go to sleep absolutely affect your ability to sleep soundly. And there's lots of advice out there about what you can do about that. I want to say to you, this spiritual rhythm has absolutely helped me recognize going into sleep as giving myself back to the hands of God and awakening in the morning as I get another go round. So the gratitude of the morning and the relinquishing of the evening. We talked last week about that childhood prayer. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. I don't know why we teach that to children, but maybe we need to start praying it. A reminder that God is holding us all the time. But when we recognize God is holding us as we go into sleep, we can experience that sense of spiritual womb or spiritual safety. So I want to tell you just a little bit about why in the world I'm standing here today telling you about this practice. I was a religion geek in school and I studied all kinds of stuff and I learned the history of the early church. And so brought to it just sort of that academic interest. But 28 years ago, I left Emmanuel Baptist Church where I knew the Leathers and the Sullivans and the Woodalls. And I left after 3 years of being relatively miserable. I went to Emmanuel straight out of my PhD. Being a minister of education there seemed like a good second choice to what I thought my calling was, which was teaching. And Emmanuel's not a bad place. It was not a good place for me. And I can tell you lots of things about it, and I can tell you lots of gratitude I have, but I left there pretty broken. And I left there and went to Montana. And we don't have time for that story, but I'll be happy to share it with you at some point. At Emmanuel, I had continued my workaholic tendencies. So college, master's, PhD, work at Emmanuel. And I was sure that I was a workaholic because I loved God so much. So that's why I was in the office there till 9 o'clock at night every day. And I went to Montana and started working at a log home company. And I discovered that my workaholism had nothing to do with my devotion to God. My workaholism was my unhealthy pattern of feeling responsible for everything and thinking the work was never done and it was mine to do. That's when I took my watch off. And that's when I made a commitment. I didn't know how long I'd be there. There was nothing here that I thought I was coming back to. That turned out differently, clearly. I decided to, and I got there in October, and the sun rose at a reasonable hour for a person who doesn't like early morning, and the sun set relatively late in the evening, not like it did there in the summer. In the summer, the sun set at 10 o'clock at night. We were right on the end of a time zone. I decided I needed to mark my days somehow, that my days were not going to be about the work that I accomplished. Now, it took me a while to get there, but I decided as best I could to observe sunrise and sunset every day. And I did that pretty much the whole time I was there, and it helped me. It helped me feel the movement of the days, and it helped me begin to connect to natural rhythms in a way that was healing to me. I don't think I knew it at the time. I also didn't know it was the Rocky Mountains that called me there, and God, I believe. But I didn't know that a geography could heal me in the way that that place did. And I still can't explain it, but it did. Got a call from Belmont 2 years later, who had not hired me previously, had turned me down previously. Got a call from Belmont saying, we want you to come back. We've got a position. So I was there 2 years, came back to a teaching position, came back to the busy city life of Nashville, was living right there in the Belmont neighborhood, and realized I needed to find a way to keep what I'd learned about the rhythms of a day, especially starting a job I had my whole life wanted to do. So it would have been easy to go right back to all that workaholism. I remembered learning about the hours of the day, and I wasn't interested in being in a monastery or a convent, but I remembered that the hours of the day was about noticing the movement of the light in the sky, which seemed a whole lot better spiritually and physically for me than watch time. At the same time, a lovely coalescing of things happened. I met and got to know well a singer-songwriter who the background of his songs is often about what's happening in the sky or the seasons. I met an artist who took this book that I've been working from as I've talked to you and had been commissioned to paint 8 angels of the hours. And she painted 8 angels. Each had a different musical instrument that fit sort of the promise and invitation of that hour of the day. It seems like there was one more factor, but all of that kind of came together in my head, and I thought, okay, what would practicing the practice of the hours look like for a non-monastic in a regular working job life? And I shared a little bit of this last week. So I got out the Book of Common Prayer or some other book of hours, and there's a prayer you're supposed to read at every session and a psalm you're supposed to read. And I did that for about a month, and it made me nuts. It's not that I don't like repetition. It's the saying somebody else's words over and over and over again is not the language of my soul. And I'm saying it that way because you might love it. It might be just what you need to do this. But it didn't work for me. So I thought, okay, what is this good for? What am I feeling drawn to? And that's when I realized that the times of day I struggle with the most, from that previous workaholism lesson about it, thinking it was for God and discovering it wasn't, or that at least it wasn't, it was more my unhealthy pattern. I tried to make it lauds. Often it was prime by the time I got to it. But that first moment of awakening, I did not feel grateful for another day. So I prayed to feel grateful for another day. And after about 6 weeks of that, I'd wake up feeling grateful. Now, I'm talking to you about this 25 years later, and I'm still confessing mornings are not my favorite. But when I really get to the friction, when I really get to a pattern of waking up going, here I go again, I remember that and I start praying. Not praying that I'm grateful when I'm not, but praying that my gratitude will rise back up again. I know it's in me. It's just hard to find at 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning. The reverse was even a more huge lesson for me. Known going into Vespers. I don't think I took this out on my coworkers in Montana, but I was a grouch when the sun started going down because the list of things that needed to be done was still long. And I felt like a failure, and I knew that the next morning would be bad because it would be piled up with more stuff. This is I began, so the building we were in, east was at the back of the building and west was at the front of the building. And sometimes of year out there, the sun was setting at 4 in the afternoon. I started going to the front porch before sunset, even if I still had another hour or two of work. I'd spend 4 minutes on the front porch watching the sunset. And I realized as I worked hard on why this was such a problem for me, because I like evening hours, I like dusk, I like the beauty of dusk. It was my pride. It was my pride thinking, I'm supposed to be more productive than everybody else. I'm supposed to get all this done. If I don't get this done, who knows what could, the sky could fall if I don't get my to-do list done. Had not been my experience. The sky had not fallen. But that frustration, aggravation, pride made the end of my work days miserable. The spiritual work for me of known into Vespers was not only forgiving myself for my functional atheism, but it was handing it back to God and saying, I gave it my best shot. I really did. I worked hard today, as hard as I could. And I promise tomorrow to get up and do that again, if I get it tomorrow. But I'm letting this go. And again, it didn't happen overnight. I didn't immediately go, ding, life is good. But it taught me, and I fall back into those patterns and have to remind myself who holds my life, who's holding all of us. And I want to be connected. I want to live in the company of that God. And to do so, I gotta take my smallness seriously. And I'm also here to say that has become a great relief. To know that I have one small life, and that's all I'm gonna get, and it's all I'm responsible for, hasn't been a big disappointment. It's been a great relief. So for me, that morning first daylight, absence of gratitude, and praying to feel the gratitude. I was never not glad to be alive, but I didn't feel it. I wasn't happy to be awake. I was happy to be alive, but not so much awake. And then releasing the day. And I still grade papers sometimes in the evening, not as often. And almost every day now I have the glory of getting to feed the horses as the sun is going down. And walking back from the barn, I release the day so that the evening can be what it needs to be to help me prepare to rest. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Don't be mad at me. I want you to stand up or move around and find 2 people that you're not living with. So you're going to share with some people that don't know your rhythms as well as your spouse might, okay? And we're just going to take a couple minutes. But thinking about that time of friction for you and that time of flow and what I'm suggesting to you. And again, so does Judy Skeen practice the 8 hours of the day, every month? No. Does Judy Skeen's awareness of the seasons of the day shape how she encounters friction or flow? Yes. So a modern day non-monastic life invitation to think about how your days might be more in the company of God if you could participate in renovating those seasons. Okay? So chairs if you want to drag them, or standing if you want to. We're talking 5, 6, 7 minutes. 3 people. Everybody gets a chance to share. So if take a couple of minutes yourself and then listen quietly while others share, and I'll call you back. Ready, set, go. And it's okay if you bust up this arrangement of chairs too.
Session meetings here and do some liturgy and some hymnody. We'll often look at those end of the day hymns, but we're sitting there going right into the meeting.
Maybe have them sing at the end. Or there, I've got a poem called Sweet Darling.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I mean, I think about it. We didn't have any rhythm, but we did. And most times was getting one done before dinner, but there was no preparation for Sunday until it was finished.
Right.
And now it's even worse because we're looking at our phones and inspirations and we're just trying to, we think we're going to shut down and our bodies, our internal clocks.
I have been because I've been, it's that one sin, breaking the 10 commandments every church once a year.
Right, right.
But and so on, if we start with that, we don't have to do it. Like, maybe you're going to one of my spiritual teachers, not the Ben who was what was Ben's name at Ben Furnace? He was Ben Johnson. He would be a seminary. Was my spiritual and he was the read notes and give the day.
Well, and that's kind of, I'm always been in and I was working three part-time jobs. But as that energy is all there. And I'm actually just the last few years I thought, I'm trying to create a paper between 9 and 5. Made it a work life, and most of the things I'm not working, just and I hope I've got yeah.
Well, what I have the options. And Sunday afternoons, I would start to and I'm not
I said I had a that's twice a day. So it got me moving when I probably because I was in pain. It kept me moving. But yeah, you're right. I was thinking I was saying something that I didn't like. Nobody gets that. Maybe emergency room docs and firemen get that sense of call. But you have to. I'm finally. I had to do the wire. I wasn't crisis where I wanted to be.
Certainly in the arts, you get the calls. Say, well, that's this person this week. Either been moving.
I didn't know how they changed it. They seem to be doing all right. Well, I had a plan today to do a kind of modified circle of trust together, but when I didn't get through things last week, I altered it. So I think this is almost easy. So thank you. All right, as you're ready, if you'll return to your seats. Ding, 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 ding. As you're able, return to your seats. Hello. Hello. Thank you so much for entering into that conversation. I guess I could have let you keep talking, but I thought you might have some questions. That's good. So I have a poem to read to you at the close, which is in just a few minutes, but we've got 2 or 3, maybe 4 minutes for questions if you got them. Yes. Yeah, I think, yes. So are you talking about being physically present or are you talking about being present, present? Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I think we do that gives away our life in ways we don't want to is go on to autopilot. I talked about that a little bit last week, and I've lived far too many days of my life on autopilot. And by autopilot, I don't mean checked out. I was doing my work. I was showing up. I was diligent. But I wasn't present as my full person, able to bring everything, able to bring my full humanity, my truest self to the task. Um, Often with my students or with other groups, I will say, okay, so you've arrived, you're sitting in the chair, you're ready to listen, your feet are on the ground. Is the rest of you here? If I were to invite you to collect body, mind, heart, and soul where your feet are, what would that require of you? And I think for most of us, it would take a minute or 10 to actually get fully here. And some of us never do, I'm sorry to say. Some of us stay so far in our minds in the future or the past. If you spent 20 minutes today while we were sitting here together thinking about what somebody said to you in the hallway after the service, that's not being present here. It's not evil, but it's you giving away being present to the life that you have. So some people don't are like, well, of course I'm present. I'm right here. And I get that. That's my autopilot. That's what I'm describing as autopilot. I'm here. I'm where I'm supposed to be. I showed up on time. But did I bring all of me? And I think you're exactly right that what I'm suggesting is, and you could do this 8 times a day if you wanted to. What I'm suggesting is a pause that nobody around you might even know you're pausing. You could be sitting at your desk at work. You could be driving your car. You could be doing what you're supposed to be doing, but internally, you just went to a place of touching base. I have on my computer a piece of paper that says return. And for me, it is return to the heart of God. Getting busy, sending emails. I look up, oh, yeah, return to the heart of God. And in the heart of God is where I am most fully present. So, yeah, I think I was a decent teacher most of the time I've been at Belmont. The last 10 years, I've been so much more present in my classroom. And I learned to protect the 10 minutes before class, to not go to a meeting that's going to end 2 minutes before class and dash into the classroom and then take 10 minutes to actually fully show up there. That my students deserve me fully present. So I think that's also an individual personality kind of thought. What does it take for you to be fully present? And what I described to you at the beginning of today, where I was saying students who are saying quiet time is this 30 minutes at the beginning of the day, again, not opposed to that. And for some people, that rhythm may be what it takes for you to be present through the rest of the day. My hunch is even people who do that really well, if you checked in with them at noon or 3, could do a bit of returning to the heart of God. But it's that practice that helps me know when I'm there and when I'm not. Yeah. Anything else? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say that. So one of the things I do in addition to teaching is lead Circle of Trust retreats, which is part of Parker Palmer, who I quoted, Center for Courage and Renewal. And at the heart of it is this idea that when we live separated from our truest self, we play our roles in the world, and those roles aren't bad. But when those roles in the world are a distance from our truest self, not only are they exhausting to maintain, but we're more apt to do damage because we're not connected to that deepest self. So he calls it a divided life. And this, what we're talking about in being present, is trying to move toward living undivided. So it would be anti-severance. Yeah. Thank you all. Oh, yes. The Music of Silence by David Stendhal Rast. A lot of what you heard from me about the particular hours came from that. And he talks about the music, the chants that go with each of those as well. Okay. Thank you all for your attention. This has been fun. Can I? Oh, okay. I won't read them. Thanks. You've got some good folks coming up the next 3 weeks. I think you'll enjoy it. If you don't, let them know. No, I'm kidding.